Hello students, welcome to fourth session of Business Law lecture series. In this class we are going to learn essentials of contract with some case laws. Before that, let us have a small recap of previous classes. In the previous class, we learned regarding proposal, offer plus acceptance, it will become an agreement. When an agreement become legally enforceable, it will become a contract. The basic structure of a contract. Tell me what will comes to your mind when seeing these aspects? Food, water, shelter, clothing. Yes, it is essentials of life, without which it is difficult to live. Like the same, we have some essentials for a contract, without which we cannot consider it a contract. An agreement becomes enforceable by law only when it fulfills certain conditions, and these certain conditions are called essentials of contract. And these essentials of contract is specified in section 10 of Indian Contract Act 1872. And these essentials of contract are listed here: offer and acceptance, legal relationship, contractual capacity, lawful consideration, lawful object, free consent, certainty of terms, possibility of performance, not expressly declared void, and legal formalities. Even if we miss a single essential condition, the contract will not become valid. So we should be very careful regarding these 10 essentials of contract. Let us start with the first one, offer and acceptance. Offer means we know the proposal or promise, and acceptance means giving consent to such offer or promise. And these offer and acceptance must be lawful. So let us see the term meaning. Lawful implies the offer and acceptance must conform to the rules laid down in Indian Contract Act. Anything which is beyond the boundaries of Indian Contract Act, which is beyond the rules and regulations specified in Indian Contract Act, cannot be considered as lawful offer or lawful acceptance. Let us see some examples. Assume that Mr. Praveen and it is Mr. Nitin. So Mr. Praveen wanted to sell his car. So he made an offer to Mr. Nitin for his sale of car. And Mr. Nitin, so he accepted to purchase it. So Praveen made an offer and Nitin accepted his offer. So it become valid or lawful offer and acceptance. We cannot find anything illegal in this agreement. So this is regarding lawful offer and acceptance. Let us see one more example. So Mr. Chintu and Mr. Mintu made an agreement. So Mr. Chintu offered to make a robbery collectively, and Mr. Mintu accepted to join them for making some robbery in a bank. There is an offer made by Chintu and acceptance made by Mintu. But can we call it as lawful offer and acceptance? No. It's not lawful offer and acceptance, because making robbery is beyond the rules and regulations specified in Indian Contract Act. So hope you understood the first essential of contract, that is the offer and acceptance must be lawful. And the second one, legal relationship. Legal relationship specifies the intentions to create legal obligation. For example, ಒಂದು ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಗೆ ಇಬ್ಬರು ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಎಂಟರ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಆ ಇಬ್ಬರು ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ಗಳಿಗೆ ಕೂಡ ಕ್ಲಿಯರ್ ಇರಬೇಕು. ಅವ್ರು ಏನು ಟರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಕಂಡೀಷನ್ಸ್ಗಳನ್ನ ಅವ್ರ ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮೆನ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅದನ್ನ ಫುಲ್ಫಿಲ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ಪಾರ್ಟಿ ಫೇಲ್ಯೂರ್ ಆದರೆ ಅನದರ್ ಪಾರ್ಟಿ ಅದನ್ನ ಕೋರ್ಟಲ್ಲಿ ಕ್ಲೈಮ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು, ಅವರು ಲೀಗಲ್ ಆಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ಗಳನ್ನ ತಗೊಳ್ಬೋದು. ಸೊ ಇಂಥ ಇಂಟೆನ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಇಟ್ಟುಕೊಂಡು ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಮಾಡುವಂಥ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ಗಳೇನಿದೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಲೀಗಲ್ ರಿಲೇಶನ್ಶಿಪ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಸೊ ಯಾವುದೇ ಒಂದು ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಗೆ ಲೀಗಲ್ ರಿಲೇಶನ್ಶಿಪ್ ಇರುವಂಥದ್ದು ಎಸೆನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ಆಗಿರ್ತದೆ. ಇಂಟೆನ್ಷನ್ ಟು ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಲೀಗಲ್ ಆಬ್ಲಿಗೇಷನ್ ಎಮಾಂಗ್ ದ ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಟು create an agreement at the time of entering into contract. Both the parties should know their legal obligations. An agreement creating moral, social, domestic or spiritual relationship cannot be considered as a valid contract because these relationship cannot be considered as a legal relationship. Indian Contract Act Section 10 is a silent, that means which will not specify the specified terms regarding legal relationship, but these things has brought from English law, so which specifies the importance of legal relationship. So let us see some examples. Tell me whether there is a legal relationship between lawyer and the client. Yes, so there is a legal relationship between lawyer and client, because both of these two parties knows their legal obligations before entering into contract. ಅವರ ಜವಾಬ್ದಾರಿಗಳು ಏನು, ಅವರು ಒಂದು ವೇಳೆ ಆ ಟರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ಫುಲ್ಫಿಲ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಫೇಲ್ಯೂರ್ ಆದರೆ, ಇನ್ ಕೇಸ್ ಲಾಯರ್ ಫೇಲ್ಯೂರ್ ಆದರೆ ಕ್ಲೈಂಟ್ ಅವರ ಲೀಗಲ್ ಆಬ್ಲಿಗೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ತಗೊಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಐ ಮೀನ್ ಕ್ಲೈಂಟ್ ಕೋರ್ಟಿಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದು, ಅಥವಾ ಕ್ಲೈಂಟ್ ಫೇಲ್ಯೂರ್ ಆದರೆ ಲಾಯರ್ ಕೋರ್ಟಿಗೆ ಹೋಗುವಂಥ ಚಾನ್ಸಸ್ ಇರ್ತದೆ. Business consultant, again it is legal relationship. In case of partnership, of course there is a legal relationship between the partners. So here is an example of father and son. Can we call it as a legal relationship? Assume that it's Mr. Nutan and his father. His father promised to make certain pocket money every month, but during the last month, maybe because of COVID-19, he failed to make pocket money. He failed to make payment of this pocket money. At this time, can Mr. Nutan go to court for claiming such pocket money? No, definitely no, because it's domestic relationship. So pocket money koduva munche father and son, both father and son were not having any kind of intention of legal obligation. ಪಾಕೆಟ್ ಮನಿ ಕೊಡದೇ ಇದ್ರೆ ಕೋರ್ಟಲ್ಲಿ ಕ್ಲೈಮ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು ಅನ್ನುವಂಥ ಲೀಗಲ್ ಆಬ್ಲಿಗೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಅವರ ಮೈಂಡಲ್ಲಿ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಇದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಲೀಗಲ್ ರಿಲೇಶನ್ಶಿಪ್ ಅಂತ ಕರೆಯೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಡೊಮೆಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ರಿಲೇಶನ್ಶಿಪ್ ಅಂಡ್ ನಾಟ್ ಲೀಗಲ್ ರಿಲೇಶನ್ಶಿಪ್. ಅಂಡ್ ಇನ್ ಕೇಸ್ ಆಫ್ ವೈಫ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಹಸ್ಬೆಂಡ್, again it's a domestic relationship and not legal relationship. If any promise in between the husband and wife cannot be called as the contract. It's just an agreement between them. It cannot be called as contract because there is no legal relationship between the husband and wife. Guru and people, again it's a spiritual relationship and not legal relationship. Can you just recall the story of Ekalavya and Dronacharya? Yes. ದ್ರೋಣಾಚಾರ್ಯ ಏನು ಕೇಳಿರ್ತಾನೆ ಅವನ ಏಕಲವ್ಯನ ಹೆಬ್ಬೆರಳನ್ನು ಕೊಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ. ಅಫ್ಕೋರ್ಸ್ ಏಕಲವ್ಯ ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸ್ ಕೂಡ ಮಾಡಿರ್ತಾನೆ. ಬಟ್ ನಮ್ಮ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಲಾ ಪ್ರಕಾರ ನಾವು ನೋಡೋದಾದ್ರೆ, ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ವಿ ಎನ್ಫೋರ್ಸ್ ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟ್? ಆ ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟ್ ಎನ್ಫೋರ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡಲೇಬೇಕಾದ ಅನಿವಾರ್ಯತೆ ಏಕಲವ್ಯನಿಗೆ ಇರ್ತಿತ್ತ? ಇಲ್ಲ, ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಎ ಸ್ಪಿರಿಚುವಲ್ ರಿಲೇಶನ್ಶಿಪ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ನಾಟ್ ಲೀಗಲ್ ರಿಲೇಶನ್ಶಿಪ್. ಅದನ್ನ ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟ್ ಅನ್ನು ಫುಲ್ಫಿಲ್ ಮಾಡಲೇಬೇಕಾದ ಅನಿವಾರ್ಯತೆ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ. So in all these three situations, we cannot consider as a contract. It's just agreement because there is no legal relationship between or among the parties before entering into or at the time of entering into contract. Hope you understood. The second term, it is legal relationship. The second, essentials of a valid contract. So in case of business law, we are going to learn these laws with some case studies. So these case studies are the major or the famous cases, and the judgment given to these cases will become a model for other cases. So here is a case of Mr. Balfour and Mrs. Balfour during 1919. So I'll tell these cases just like a story. Just enjoy the story, but having some observations in on it. Okay? So Mr. Balfour and Mrs. Balfour, of course, a newly married couple. Mr. Balfour was civil engineer at Sri Lanka, and Mr. Balfour and Mrs. Balfour went to England for some vacation. They went for some trip, but his wife became ill and she needed medical attention. So for that reason, it was decided Mrs. Balfour was to remain behind in England and Mr. Balfour returned to Sri Lanka. Mr. Balfour would pay her £30 a month until she returned to Sri Lanka. Because now Mrs. Balfour is at England and Mr. Balfour was at Sri Lanka. So in order to maintain her medical expenditure as well as day-to-day expenditure, Mr. Balfour has to pay £30 a month until she returned to Sri Lanka. And this agreement was made while their relationship was fine. So at that particular point of time, both Mrs. and Mr. Balfour were living with some love or affections when everything was fine. And later, the relationship was soured. Husband stopped making payments. That means Mr. Balfour stopped making payments. And for that reason, Mrs. Balfour has brought the case to court. And she wanted to enforce the agreement. So enforce the agreement means she wanted Mr. Balfour to continue making payments. This is all about the story. So now, can you tell me anyone what the court has to decide? Whether it should be in favor of Mrs. Balfour or Mr. Balfour. Just apply the two essential of contracts rules. The first one, there should be lawful offer and lawful acceptance. So here, of course, the offer made by husband, Mr. Balfour, and acceptance made by Mrs. Balfour for making such payment. Of course, both of them are agree and there is no illegality on this concept. So this is lawful offer and acceptance. There is no doubt. And apply the second thing, that is, there should be legal relationship. Can we find the legal relationship between these two persons, husband and wife? No, right? So husband and wife is a domestic relationship and which cannot be called as legal relationship. Of course, later the parties separated and were divorced. The judgment of the case was that the agreement was purely social and domestic in nature. The court says it's purely social and domestic nature, and therefore it was presumed that the parties did not intend it to be legally bound. At the time of entering into contract, either Mr. Balfour or Mrs. Balfour is having an idea in their mind to appeal the court for any failure to fulfill their agreement. ಅವ್ರು ಏನು ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅದನ್ನ ಫುಲ್ಫಿಲ್ ಮಾಡದೇ ಇದ್ರೆ ಈ ಇಬ್ಬರ ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಏನಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಮಿಸ್ಟರ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಮಿಸಸ್ ಬ್ಯಾಲ್ಫೋರ್, ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ಒಬ್ಬ ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ಗಳಾದರೂ ಕೂಡ ಕೋರ್ಟಿಗೆ ಹೋಗಬಹುದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳುವಂತ ಐಡಿಯಾಸ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಇರಲೇ ಇಲ್ಲ. The Court of Appeal unanimously held that there was no enforceable agreement because there is no legal relationship. For that reason, the court says, or the judgment was in favor of Mr. Balfour rather than Mrs. Balfour. This says that there was not an agreement at all, or there was not a contract at all, because it's just a promise made by Mr. Balfour and acceptance made by Mrs. Balfour, which cannot be considered as a contract because which fails to fulfill one of the essentials of contract, that is legal relationship. So hope you understood the concepts. So let us have a first recap of today's class. So we have started learning regarding essentials of contract. There are 10 items in case of essentials of contract specified under section 10 of Indian Contract Act 1872, and out of that we studied offer and acceptance, which should be legal, and legal relationship, and that we have learnt a case of Mr. Balfour and Mrs. Balfour case, that is Balfour and Balfour case, based on legal relationship concept. So let us have a first quiz. Balfour vs. Balfour case judgment was given based on these essentials of a valid contract. Just to pick the answer: lawful offer, lawful acceptance, legal relationship, and the fourth option none of these. Of course, the judgment was given based on legal relationship. Choose yes or no for the statement. An agreement is legally enforceable only when it fulfills certain conditions. The answer is yes. And these conditions are called as essentials of a contract. Choose one which is not the essential element of a contract. Lawful offer, lawful acceptance, legal relationship, and none of these. Of course, you can guess it is none of these because these three are essentials of a contract. Judgment of Balfour vs. Balfour case was in favor of Mr. Balfour, Mrs. Balfour, Sri Lankan government, or England government. Yes, the answer is yea, it is in favor of Mr. Balfour. And the last question: in order to become a valid contract, offer and acceptance must be lawful, unlawful, proper, or traditional. Yes, it's an easy question. It's lawful. Of course, both the offer and acceptance must be lawful. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching and keep learning.